Okay, let's move forward for the next panel on the space and geospatial value chain. Co-creating geospatial knowledge infrastructure will focus on the integration of space and geospatial infrastructure to generate insights in digital economy. I would like to invite the moderator, and I will try, I don't know, Pacome. Yeah. I tried to do it correctly, so Pacome Revillon. C'est parfait? Okay. He's CEO, Euroconsult. He's on the stage along with the panelists. So, Reinhard Blasi, welcome. He's head of communications of EUSPA, the European Union Agency for the Space Program. Yana Gevorgyan, welcome. She's director of Secretariat. And Mr. Christian Heipke, he's President, International Society of the Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. There he is. Up to you.
Thank you very much. Please have a seat. Welcome everyone to this second roundtable of the day, and thanks a lot to Dr. Manali. I'm sure some of her comments on climate change will certainly resonate as part of the purpose of space, not necessarily the only one, is to bring information, transparency, data, and to obviously turn these into actual capabilities and support to decision making. And certainly gas emissions, among other topics, are areas of investment and where a lot has happened and should happen in the coming years. So, just to give an idea, and before getting into the session, thinking of space and satellite, I think by next year there should be at the minimum 400 to 500 satellites around Earth, really here to collect data of various kinds, from optical imagery below 30 centimeters down to gas emission monitoring, heat monitoring, altimeters to manage oceans and so forth, which will be obviously an unprecedented amount of data and variety of data being collected. And depending on all and every sensor, higher revisit capability, meaning coming back to topics mentioned earlier today, more revisits, the opportunity to have fresher data and to build theories and support a more dynamic decision making and information creation. So, but it only matters as long as it can get integrated into a value chain and co-create geospatial knowledge infrastructure. That is the topic for today. So I'm very happy to have with me today Reinhard Blasi, acting head of communications for EUSPA, the new European agency. So he will tell us more. Prior to working for GSA and EUSPA, he worked as strategy consultant for various innovative businesses. Next to him, Yana Gevorgyan, I tell it right, director of Secretariat. And prior to this position, Yana was also senior international relations specialist at NOAA. And Christian Heipke is president of ISPRS and also professor in Leibniz University. So before we got into the discussion part of this, I would like to invite you right now to share some insights on EUSPA and obviously space and geospatial.
Thank you, Pacome. And thanks for having me. A big compliment to the organizers. I know that it has not been easy, despite everything, to get all of us together and connect the people on the internet. So congratulations. And by the way, this is the first real in-person conference for me since the pandemic. So it's a real pleasure to be here. And I'd like to bring to you a bit of a European perspective of what we have just heard. And everything starts, of course, with infrastructure. From a European perspective point of view, these are the assets that we have. You know Copernicus, of course, the #1 world provider of space data. Galileo, operational since 2016. EGNOS, not to be forgotten, a safety of life system that helps, for example, aircraft to land safely, and GovSatcom, a secure governmental satellite communications program that is upcoming. Now, these European assets, they should not work alone, but they should be seen as an integrated system. And when we talk about integrated systems, what we mean is synergies. And there are many, many ways of how this works already today. You see here some. My favorite one is agriculture. If you talk to farmers in precision agriculture, they are using Copernicus, EGNOS, and Galileo on a daily basis. And for them, it's a matter of fact, self-driving cars. For them, it's a matter of fact, self-driving tractors are there. So this is really one of the examples where we see how synergetic these European assets can be used. Now, Pacome mentioned EUSPA, a new agency. Not so new, actually. This year, only in May, we were transformed from GSA, the European GNSS agency, into the space EU agency for the space program. And the space program, its assets you have just seen. So our role is to make these synergies that I just mentioned materialize. How do we do this? These are the main tasks that we are having on our plate. So we are the exploitation manager. I don't like the term exploitation manager, but the space community knows what it's meant. Bringing the services down to earth is what it's meant. These are critical infrastructure, so we are also the gatekeeper of security, which is very important to keep the system safe and reliable. And then we do market development and innovation. And I will tell you a bit more how you can benefit from this as well, because in the end, we want to support businesses, the recovery, and the innovation that is being brought by the EU space program. Some numbers, I will not read them to you, but I think we do all agree that the space assets that we have at our hands, they are becoming more and more important. And this means also they bring more and more benefits, be it jobs created, be it science and research supported, and also, last but not least, bringing it to the citizens, to everyone. Today, for example, we have 2 billion Galileo-enabled smartphones. I bet there will be barely anyone in this room without a Galileo-enabled smartphone. Pacome mentioned it is about knowledge, and this is also one of the pillars that we do. We create regular market reports that have become a reference in the world of GNSS, and in January 2022 we will issue a market report that is encompassing also Earth observation. Copernicus, of course, but also beyond. So I invite you to download the current one and look forward for the upcoming one. And that's not all. There's a wealth of information that we are creating, and we are putting this available for free. You have seen just some examples, be it Internet of Things, be it new ways of doing agriculture using space assets, etc., etc. So covering basically all segments, and please have a look, download it, use it for your own purposes, and give us feedback. Giving feedback, it's very important to us. We are a user-centric agency, and that means that every year we get together the community of all segments in order to listen to them and to gather what are the user requirements towards the EU space assets and how can we meet these requirements. It's not that you start a system and then you are done, but this needs to evolve. Last year this did not happen. Next year this will happen again, and please stay tuned and come together. It's not only about knowledge and the knowledge infrastructure, but it's also about solid investments. And these are the three main programs that we are managing in order to materialize the benefits. The Horizon Europe, probably the most known one. This is now open. Please have a look, first call, with an emphasis on the European Green Deal, which fits very well to the presentation that we have seen before. Space assets can have a big impact, a positive impact on the European Green Deal. Fundamental elements, this is the arm of investment where we do invest in devices, receivers mostly. And then a new one, the Cassini program. This is looking beyond. And now we want to reach more and more also innovators, entrepreneurs, SMEs, startups, and so on and so forth. And there are some opportunities coming up. This is part of the Cassini program, My EU Space Competition. It's open. And you can apply until 15th of November. It's very slim, it's very straightforward. Please spread the message to your community and incite them to apply for it. My EU Space Competition. There's a hackathon coming up. It's one of a series, in that case, Connecting the Arctic, 5th to 7th of November. Again, please spread the word. You find all of the information on our website and participate. And last but not least, maybe the most encompassing information opportunity for you to learn about all I have mentioned just before. It's the Space Downstream Innovation Days. That will happen 8th and 9th of November in Prague at our headquarters. This will be on the spot. We also try to do more and more real events, but at the same time it has a hybrid format so you can also connect. And here you will learn everything you need to know in order to see how you can benefit from space and from EU space investments in order to get the innovations to reality. And with this, thank you very much, and I'm sure that we will have a further discussion.
Thank you, Reinhard. I think it gave a good view at some of the efforts led by EUSPA to work together with the research, private sector, and community to get this new innovation and services becoming a reality. So, Yana, I would like to invite you for Geosecretariat.
Let's see. So, hello everybody. Feels a bit strange actually to be among people, but really, really lovely. And Sanjay, it's no surprise you're among the first ones to actually get people together. So I'm going to start with this image of our planet Earth from the International Space Station. I haven't seen it like that, but I've worked with people who've seen it like that and have seen this view. And I'm going to channel and quote one of my idols and mentors, I think she's in the room, Barb Ryan, who used to say, and I think she probably still says, countries have borders, Earth observations don't. And she's right about that. So if there was a celebrity club on Earth observations and geospatial, come on, Barb Ryan would be right there. She'd be at the head of that club. So we in Geo certainly firmly believe that Earth observations have no borders, and we needed a coalition of the willing governments and partners who would come together and really take a similar approach, transboundary, transdisciplinary, transsectoral, to work collectively, to mobilize action, to bring Earth observations to the forefront of decision making. I guess I'm the one running the slide, so I can move on. Why is this important? In 2015, the Stockholm Resilience Center put out this graphic that shows the planetary boundaries. And as you can see in quite several of them, we have exceeded the safe space and started to push into the high-risk areas, which really means that we all need to take the collective action, which we have now been developing in the framework of various global policy agendas. I'm using just this slide on SDGs, but as we've heard already in the keynote address, there's also the Paris Agreement that set out an action plan for the governments to take concrete action, concrete measures to meet ambitious targets. There is the Convention on Biological Diversity, which was actually meeting last week, that is also looking at a very important post-2020 framework that would help us mitigate massive biodiversity loss that is taking place not only due to climate change, but also due to economic activity and human activity. But I love to use this wedding cake representation of the SDGs because it actually shows the relationships between these various SDGs. And so as you can see, the base layer of this cake is the biosphere. And that's the environment above the land and below water. And that's really the home of Earth observations. So if we don't take care of the vitality and health of the biosphere, our chances of doing well at the societal level are probably diminished, and never mind the economic development and economic growth. So it's really important for us to recognize that taking care of our environmental resources, natural resources, is key to sort of achieving and maintaining that fragile equilibrium between the needs of the humans for economic activity and the sensitivity of the environment. We heard the speaker, the keynote speaker, making references to GDPs, the gross domestic products, as a way to talk about sort of the wealth and the economic activity within the countries. I like the fact that there are already projects out there that are looking at the gross ecosystem product, a different way to measure the economic vitality of the countries by actually looking at the value that ecosystems provide through the various goods and services. I contend that's a much more holistic way of measuring the state of play, the state of affairs within their country borders. So just a quick overview. I'm sure you've heard about GEO before, but today we are on 7 continents. There are 113 countries that are represented through their governments in the Group on Earth Observations. We have over 130 participating organizations, which are international, regional organizations from all walks of life, from science, policy, development, think tanks, technology, associations of industry. I look at them as our implementing partners, as our delivery partners, helping us to deliver the benefits of Earth observations to the countries. And we have 15 associates who are actually nationally based commercial entities who are also delivery partners, helping us to create strategic partnerships to leverage the latest digital technologies, the high-resolution commercial space imagery, to put them into the work stream and really deliver the knowledge, the information products that is much needed in our countries. A big emphasis within GEO, I want to say, is on the developing world, is on the low and middle countries. The catalyst for creating GEO was, I would say, I would go back to 2002 with the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, which back then recognized the importance of building capacity in the low and middle income countries to use environmental information. So within GEO, we really look for ways to extend the benefits and the results of a lot of the work that is funded by government organizations to those low and middle income countries. Presently, we've defined these 4 areas as our focus areas, so they provide policy drivers for much of our activity. We use these global agendas, global policy agendas, as the place in which to derive the policy questions, which then guide our work to extract policy-relevant insights. What we're hoping to see more of is deliveries that we can really translate into specific impact and economic value. So I'm using here one example from one of our GEO activities. It's an initiative on global water sustainability that is a partnership of public and private entities that's developed a global stream flow forecast, which really provides information about river discharge up to 15 days. It's actually a much longer range than services that are being provided by other flood forecast systems. And so in this particular case in Honduras in 2020, I believe, maybe it was 2019, in these last 2 years, everything has been a blur. So when was, I think it was 2020, Hurricane Eta, and then only 2 weeks later, Hurricane Iota made a landfall in the Caribbean. And this particular case where the energy company had to take quick measures to discharge a certain amount of water from their reservoir after Hurricane Eta so that Iota's water and precipitation would actually not cause massive flooding in the valley where 2 million people live and which provides about 60% of their domestic gross product. So there is an actual value that's been determined in terms of the savings that resulted from them using that service that was developed through the partnerships within GEO. So it's really important for us to be able to better define these kinds of impact and value as a way to then be able to work with various funding organizations in climate finance, in sustainable finance, as well as philanthropists and individual major donors to scale these activities globally so they can really make the impact at the scale at which we need. So I keep talking about delivering the results and the benefits to the developing countries. We really see open knowledge, in other words, knowledge that's being created using open data, open software, open standards, being a key way of bridging the digital divide. Not every country can participate in the GEO work, in the GEO activities, but if the results, if the information products, if the insights, tools, services, and applications can actually be provided through the various data infrastructures, knowledge infrastructures, in a way that they can be reproduced and adapted to local context and national context, then we can actually walk the talk and extend the benefits of our work to the countries where they're needed the most. But just getting those tools out there is not enough. We keep talking about the science policy interface. We want to make sure that these tools are being used to inform decision-making within policy, and policy briefs is another way to go in that direction by contextualizing this technical work and explaining the policy relevance of our work to the policy and user communities. That's to be supplemented with practical guidance that actually talks about how to use the various tools. So together, these 1 through 3 really serve as the package that I would contend is needed to get the scientific, research-based results of the various activities through the use of digital technologies into the hands of the appropriate user communities. And then there is obviously the finance, because no sustained action can be happening without the finance backing it. And we've already started conversations with the sustainable finance, climate finance communities. I'm really glad to know that the Green Climate Fund requires the proposals that are coming from the countries to fund their climate action, requires their proposals to be based on data and Earth data in particular. So if we can achieve a state where finance opportunities are predicated on the use of environmental data, on Earth data, then we'll be much closer to financing smart action. I spoke about the bridging the digital divide through open knowledge, so I'm going to skip through this. And really, in the last few years, we've had successful increased cooperation with the private commercial companies that provide digital technologies through partnering with Google, Amazon Web Services, and in this particular case, also with Microsoft Planetary Computer, we're able to actually extend the benefit of using cloud technologies to the low and middle income countries. These are sort of external programs that are not part of our core work streams, but they've generated so much enthusiasm and participation, including from countries who are not members of GEO. Using these cloud services, these countries are developing locally, nationally, socially relevant information products and knowledge. So we definitely seek to continue this. But I would say that information becomes knowledge, I think, when it has had a chance to interact with the reality. So from our perspective, it is when we actually get feedback and information from these information products having been used in the various decision-making contexts that we can really be generating robust knowledge. It really is about that feedback loop. And I think our next challenge within our community is to keenly recognize the complex relationships, interactions between the various decision-making processes, between the various integrated issues. I'm using the slide here that was developed by ICSU, International Science Council, and that is on SDG interactions. But it's only one way of speaking to the actual concept that decisions in agriculture to fight hunger can have pretty stressful impact on efforts to manage water resources. And the scientific community there is a momentum to integrate scientific and research outputs towards developing integrative solutions, which can really strengthen the synergies between the various policies and minimize and mitigate the trade-offs and the conflicts. So I think this is really where we need to move towards delivering the kind of knowledge that can actually inform these complex issues with the use of the cutting-edge technologies that are being provided through a variety of sectors. And I do believe this is my last slide. Yep. And that's our universe of communicators, of data providers, space asset operators, international organizations, citizen. It's really about us to keep this network going. And look, the colors of blue are even matching. So I think whether or not it's my last slide, I'm going to end it here because I love this, the harmony. So thank you very much. And I turn this back over to you.
Thanks a lot, Yana, for this introduction and your references to research, but also information and building knowledge and so forth. I think a great introduction for Christian to be next. Christian, Mike is yours.
Thanks very much. When I was a student, I was told that things need to be said 3 times. Once for students to hear, once for them to understand, and once for them to remember. Now, it's been said many times this morning how glad we are, more than 3 times, so I don't have to repeat it. Suffice it to say, thanks a lot, Sanji and team, for putting this up. I'll be talking about space and geospatial value chain. I'll be talking about what the geospatial knowledge infrastructure could be. And if I can get this to work, I will be talking about ISPRS, which is what I represent at the moment, with one slide and another one at the very back. In between, I'll be focusing on the actual topic. So, ISPRS is an international and non-governmental organization. You can read this, right? We're global, we're focused on science, and I'll have a message there as far as science is concerned in a minute. But we are also focusing on both stakeholders and education, which is the 3 pillars. We are very old, much older than I am, and we are a society of societies, and you can see the numbers. So, the next few slides probably capture what has been said before, but not by me. So anyway, what's the frame we're living in? What is the boundaries, if you like? We have difficulties to change, or the base, we are faced with. Again, I'm not going to read all these points in detail. They have been mentioned. Many of them have been mentioned in the course of the morning, and I guess they're not all that debatable either. I'll point out that global change is certainly one of the key developments we're faced with today, and I pretty much like the phrase, which is not from me, that we don't have a plan or planet B. That is perhaps a good idea to look at this issue, and I'm sure most of you know that anyway. Big companies entering the market. Yana, thanks very much for this show, this mentioning. There is, of course, the Esris, the Trimbles, the Hexagons, but there is now also the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Googles, etc., in our world, which, of course, makes it a little more complex. There's a changing role for governments. We've heard about governments, and of course, I can still remember the time where governments were the number one, if not the only producer of geospatial information, and that has changed. And there is points there why and how this has changed. Private industry is there with these digital globes. Us, the citizens, are there with with volunteer geographic information. And obviously, since things get more complex, there's more of a need, and we heard about the non-existence of borders on many issues, of global GI and global GI management. And there is, of course, organizations such as GEO, such as ISPRS, but others which are a little more powerful, like the United Nations, or at least more well-known, I would say, who, as we have heard, deal with that as well. At the same time, and that is important because we are dealing in a very much technically based environment, we need to take care of changes in the ICT, in the information and communication technology era. And that's been put together by Volker Liebig, who was with ESA at the time he did this, where all these different changes are basically on there. May it be digitization, may it be the Internet of Things, may it be artificial intelligence and big data. And what are we going to do with that? This is more of the applications here. Mobility, autonomous driving, smart cities has been mentioned before. Sustainable development, well, I hope we are going to achieve sustainable development. And of course, the same is true for disaster management. My view on ICT is I'm glad other people do it, so I can get the latest, the fastest computer, the best network, the fastest network, etc., which of course means we have to look at them. We have to look at developing these requirements together with ICT people and take advantage of them. So that is the frame. The topic was space and geospatial value chain for the geospatial knowledge infrastructure. So first, space. I will reduce space to Earth observation here, noting that there's, of course, other factors such as GNSS, etc. I just don't know too much about it, which is why I'd rather leave it to other people to discuss it. Most of you would have heard about the new space or the space 4.0 developments. If we want to collaborate with space people, it's a good idea to take these into account. Swarms of satellites. Think about Planet. Think about Kepler. Think about Ice Age. Many different countries involved. We were hearing there are 60 countries in this room. I dare say there is more countries with space programs. Was it 113 countries you had in Geo, or many, many anyway? So this is getting more and more, for various reasons, of course. So international cooperation is the point here. Private funding, we've all been able to read in the news that there is people going to space now who are not necessarily known as astronauts or scientists. But anyway, I understand they were having fun doing this. There is lots of private capital being poured, I should say, into space development now. At the same time, if we're turning it to environmental, obviously continuity of data, continuity of resources is of utmost importance. Continuity of data and services, but also combination, integration of different sensor informations, and therefore then the analysis of what they call analysis-ready data, which really in the old days would have been an orthophoto, is a requirement, and that requirement is of course increasingly being met. And obviously, we not only need internet, but we need very fast, low latency internet, again, being provided more and more by private companies. Space is important. Just one slide to state the obvious in terms of images, and it has been for a long time. So the geospatial value chain, that's the second part of our topic. Integrated space services have been defined before. We of course have a space segment, we have a ground segment. What perhaps has not been underlined to the necessary importance is that obviously we need in situ data. These space data are great, but in order to calibrate them, in order to make them useful for a particular task in a particular country or area, they need to be integrated with in situ data. Could be Internet of Things devices, could be something else, but that need is there. And then, of course, a service needs to be there, which is something helpful to the ordinary people, to a large area, a large number of people. And the second part, which I thought was worth mentioning in terms of the value chain, is of course the development in big data analytics or analysis. I don't need to emphasize that the amount of data is getting larger as we speak, and that it's far too much for humans to analyze one by one. And I certainly only recall briefly the developments in deep learning, in convolutional neural networks in order to automatically analyze aerial, satellite, and whatever imagery. But these must be integrated, of course, as part of these services, and they are. I've mentioned a few companies on the slide here. An important issue, however, we don't really know how those deep learning approaches work. Now, if we're being sold or given something which we don't really know how it works, are we going to trust it? So in some ways, there is work to be done in terms of explainability of these rather black box algorithms. There is, of course, a second solution, and that is we'd be convinced that they do the job if only they have done it long enough. Not sure how many of you people know how a television set works or a motor of a car. I guess you don't want to know, you just trust it. So trust can come by understanding or by being shown over and over again that the result is good enough. At this stage, I think AI still has a way to go. There is other things in there which I'm not going to mention in detail. I'd rather go on to say that if we want to put together data from different sources, and this is not new, of course, integration is the key, and integration happens spatially, which is why location comes in. If you want to overlay data, they've got to relate to the same location. Of course, they've got to have an adequate resolution also, but if they are disparate in terms of location, things don't work. I was able to switch in the digital twin buzzword. I thought I have to do it somewhere. Well, we heard about digital twins earlier where different data sets were put together. Same thing. They need to relate to the same position at an accuracy appropriate for the problem. One example, of course, of such a value chain then is Copernicus. I took this slide from DLR, which is why when it comes to the detail, some of the DLR abbreviations come in. But suffice it to say that there is a space and ground sector, there is these services, and as for Copernicus, they are emergency response, atmosphere, etc., land emergency, that you can see them on the slides. And the other important part here is then these in situ and also the other contributing missions. It's not the latest satellites alone, it's not the 10-meter Sentinels, which can do all, but you do need additional data. So bringing things together, integrating them, and I'm not going to repeat the location part. Rather, I was then interested to see what's actually meant by geospatial knowledge infrastructure. I came across this term when preparing the talk for today. I was used to talking about geospatial data infrastructure. Now, when looking into the subject, this pyramid, this sequence of words, I found a nice reference by T.S. Eliot. It's a poem, it's actually a very long poem, and I don't want to go into the lyrics here. This pyramid, however, has always been a little doubtful to me because I was never able to separate what exactly is data versus information versus knowledge or perhaps wisdom. Earlier on, action was called upon, I think by Stefan Schweinfest, which is, by the way, not part of this triangle. So I would actually say it's a somewhat vague subject, or it's not a definition, it's a concept. It's nevertheless useful, but action somehow should perhaps be integrated. So when I talk about geospatial information 4.0, that is with the quote that, these definitions are a little vague. Primary digital resource for the 21st century, no need to convince you here in the room about this, but when we talk to others, maybe we have to. Base for public, commercial, and private opinion forming and decision making, of course. There is a definition I found of the geospatial knowledge infrastructure, which goes back to 2012. I was surprised to find that nearly 10 years ago, people were using that term. Going through that definition, however, I would call that geospatial data infrastructure. And I'm happy to discuss that, but perhaps we'd rather try to do it than argue about how we call it. I'm nearly done. It's interdisciplinary in nature. I have one example here, one case study which we've actually carried out at our institute and the university. Big data, lots of that. The whole state of Niedersachsen, which is a little larger than the Netherlands, captured 16 times in trying to update land cover mapping. I'm pretty satisfied with the results. I don't want to go in any detail. Rather than, what I'll do, I'll line up here, in the interest of time, issues and stakeholders and their roles. This type of thing, I guess, is up for discussion here. And the point I was promising you before is that I believe research must be in there, research and development from day one. There was a slide where academia was among the users of geospatial data. Yes, we are, but then again, we're in the design of the systems and in the capturing and the analytics and the algorithms, probably a lot more also. That's one thing. If you want to discuss that more, I have, I'll skip that in the interest of time. I'll have one more here. Well, I promised you another slide of ISPRS, which is the invitation to our Congress next year. Thanks very much, and sorry if I did take a little more time.
That's great.
Thank you
very much.
you get those?
So I have questions that could keep us occupied for a couple of hours, but I think we're already quite on time. So I may try to focus on, let's say, what I would call is a form of triple revolution for space and thinking of geospatial. So one obviously is about the satellite or sensors that I mentioned, and I think one revolution here is the volume of it. Admittedly, there could be plenty of certain data, if not so much of certain others, so I would be a bit cautious. But there will be certainly many more data, but also a bigger part of those coming from the private sector, globally speaking, which may have some impacts on how to work with this ecosystem. The second one is obviously access to either the data or, let's say, some form of, I mean, cloud has been mentioned a lot, certain platforms like AWS, Microsoft, and others, or the DIAS in Europe. So the access and the analytics, MI, machine learning, etc. And maybe a fourth question is how to also have a bigger impact or a bigger role of satellite-based, let's say, information for in the private sector, while the government users are obviously the biggest ones today. So maybe what I could ask you and in your respective mandates, so that kind of new mix in the data sourcing, private, public sectors, what impact does it have, and also on the service side? So cloud is great to facilitate access. MI, etc., is in the build, increase what we can deliver. And still coming to Yana, it's still about making sure you are in the decision process of the final user, where it is and where decisions have to be made, whether in Honduras or in Brussels or here in the Netherlands. So it may be a bit broad, but in your view around that data sourcing, mixed private, public ecosystem, and access or leverage from the data, what's your view at EUSPA, or some priorities to work or get leverage from that ecosystem?
Wow, you open a whole universe of challenges.
Your key points on that.
And rightly so. Let me just pick out some of it.
Yeah.
When it comes to private and public, there's no either or, and there has never been an either or, private or public. I think it's the mandate of the public sector to understand the ends, and the ends, it's always the user, no matter where the user in particular comes from. If this is met, then the private sector will profit and will do what the private sector does best and carry a service, tailor it, adapt it, and bring it ultimately to the market, and this is where benefits then.
And maybe a small add-on to that, there is public and private, but there can also be a question of autonomy in terms of access to the data for EU, for example. So having, whether public or private, but having UA-based solutions as opposed to global public or private sources.
That's a second interesting point as well. Sometimes we tend to be a bit Eurocentric when it comes to space. And Eurocentric means even if you go member state by member state with national space programs, there's a risk that we don't see the whole picture. And I think this has been understood by the creation of the EU space program under one roof, where Europe needs to stick together, pool their strength in order to compete on a global level playing field. That is also important to understand, and I think it has been understood. And of course, new space, it's one of the factors that, of course, also the European EU space program needs to take into account.
Thank you. Maybe, Yana, if you want to expand on what it implies for Geosecretariat with your, obviously, some of your global objectives. You have had public-private members in those organizations. In the way of working, there was mentioned earlier today about all those data licensing issues, how much time it takes to create leverage and so forth. So give us some views on some of the dynamics of what's changing or priorities for Geosecretariat within that.
Sure, thank you. maybe one of the things I did not mention during my presentation, but certainly has been a pretty significant development within the public space in the work of GEO and CIAS, the Committee on Earth Observing Satellites, and Christian referred to it in his presentation, is this move towards analysis-ready data, and not just data, but analysis-ready products as well. And the private sector is certainly also moving in this direction. Planet, Maxar, they're also developing products that are analysis-ready. And I think our major data providers really ought to be making significant leaps towards transitioning towards analysis ready, because that's truly what is going to be a game changer, I think, in the uptake of data across the world. We are talking about space data, we're talking about in situ data, but we're talking about multi-source data, satellites, drones, you name it, and yet, in some parts of the world, especially those happen to be the most vulnerable communities, they're still very much sort of at the level of struggling how to manage a single source data. So I think if we really want to be able to impact change at the pace of challenge and the environmental change, we need to make it easier for them to make use of the data, and it needs to start with sort of transition towards analysis ready. In the same context, for Group on Earth Observations, from the beginning, our mission has been to promote open data sharing. And it's really great that now open data, the open data policies is largely the default for publicly funded data. But even within that space, there is a lot of gray area in terms of just licenses. And for large user organizations that have large legal departments, maybe it's not a big challenge to kind of comb through the licensing terms and figure out where the traps are, what to avoid. But again, if we're talking about incentivizing new user communities, if we're talking about startup organizations, for them to it looks like there are two options. Either sign on to an agreement without really knowing what the liabilities are, especially when combining and integrating different types of data, or really having to be very cautious and declining the offer. So that's another area that GEO is now putting more energy into, is to develop a set of recommendations for adopting a standardized set of licenses that will really take the guesswork out of the users in terms of what it means when they are actually agreeing to a certain license, to help level the playing field in data access and data sharing. And then I also say that, I feel like we've been just waiting for this wave. I don't know if there are any surfers among you. I'm not a surfer, but I love imagining this wave. You were getting ready for it, and this wave is now here with these commercial capabilities and the public capabilities. And the will to partner has never been really greater. We have GHGSat in the room. That is a private company that's monitoring greenhouse gas. We have CIAS, public sector. We have GEO, and we have World Geospatial Information Council, who came together really to put together a powerful resource that talks about the public and private capabilities in monitoring greenhouse gas, which serves a real purpose when you really want to have a global overview through processes like global stocktake. But at the same time, and I think that's what you're saying too, at the same time, we need to be looking at how to enable more local level solutions. And there too, I believe, much like Christian was saying, the communities from research and academia, from government and private sector need to find a way, either through accelerators or some other constructs, to come together to develop the kinds of services that will be aimed at specific utilization, but be able to be offered at lower cost, with blended finance, perhaps, schemes, de-risking sort of private investment into creating these lower cost solutions, but then again, putting the right kind of data with the right technologies into the hands of those who really need the most. I don't think we have time for either or. It's definitely time to just go all in, and that wave is here. We just need to figure out how to keep riding it.
Thank you. And I think in that wave, and as you tend to suggest, there is a question of analytical layers, and some of them are developed every 3 or 6 months on various topics as the industry grows. A number of them obviously can have a global scale, but have to be tailored to some local specifics, because the same analytics might not deliver the same accuracy or results in every place or for whatever purpose. Exactly. And then from what I've observed at least, if you really want to get deep into the decision making of what either private or public organization, it may take you a year, 2 years to really get into what the final product they need to make decision and go in that decision cycle. Maybe Christian, from your side on that question on, and what you mentioned on, let's say, reliability of those analytical layers, so having the products we can leverage from the data. So there is obviously huge and fast progress. Where do you consider we are in that trend of usable, how much of it is usable in the builds or and so forth?
A lot of it is usable if you tackle the right applications. Nothing is usable if you think science fiction, right? When I address that question with my students, I typically put up this one image. It's an image of Paris airport and Paris train station, I'm sorry, and it's this train actually which dropping down out of the building. So I'm saying, okay, have a computer write up automatically the story of what happened at Montparnasse. This is in 1895, I believe. It's a real case. Now, we're nowhere with respect to that challenge. When it comes to smaller tasks, let me say, using satellite imagery, using aerial imagery for forestry, for agriculture, using it for land cover classification, land use, using it in support decision support systems, then yes, we can do it. There is, of course, science needed in order to make sure we're doing things right, and that is in terms of quality of the input data, and that is in terms of quality of the algorithms to be employed, and both of which needs to be looked at independently. I'm proud to say that ISPRS is running such benchmarks. We're being asked by private companies, here's this new satellite product, can you please stamp it? And I would say, yeah, give us the data, we'll do this independent evaluation, and then we put the stamp on according to what we find, and you don't tell us what the stamp is supposed to be. And that's fine. Science is being looked upon as an independent evaluator, which is needed and which is happening, if taken into account. So good progress if you choose the right application.
Thank you. So I think we're already well over time, so I may have to conclude. So huge stakes for sure, urgency likely on making use or leveraging all those dynamics, but also a lot happening, and I understand it will leverage essentially partnerships and working together, public, private sector in those programs. So that might be the final word. Would like you to join me and thank our speakers for the insights today. Thank you very much for being here this morning.